questions people ask you whenever they engage in any academic work, and usually when you're writing an essay in an academic setting or any kind of written piece, written submission, is people say, well, okay, what has to be in this? And I think hopefully these ideas that I'm going to propose in this video should really give you an overview of what should be in an academic piece of work. As an overview, I think really what you need to bear in mind, there needs to be components, really, research components. And I think even if you're doing, maybe a kind of picture piece, or you're compiling some kind of report, or really there'll be different kinds of things you'll encounter when you work within academia. I think a good academic piece contains these elements. Remember, we're looking usually for precision, detail, and above all, focus. You're constructing a credible case, a credible position or an argument from extant material. There are occasions when, if say you're interviewing people, or if you're compiling statistics, then you'll be compiling that primary research yourself. But most of the time what we ask you to do here is to use and compile material that exists already and put that into a cohesive and coherent debate. Now, the first thing I think any work should have is an introduction. And these are the things to bear in mind, is that often people skim over this, or they miss it out, or they try and put too much information in. Again, focus, clarity and detail are important. They are traditionally not very interesting things to write, but they serve a very important function in drawing boundaries around the work you're about to write. Remember, what are you saying? How are you saying this exactly? What aspects of the secondary research are you going to be using to make your points? Why are you saying it? The most important part. Why? Each of these points is dependent on the size and scale of your essay. So if it's 800 words, the points that you choose from the secondary reading may not need to be as many as, say, in a massive dissertation or in a book, or something which is a bit larger in terms of wordage. The first component is context, often the most difficult part to engage with. I think it's the foundation, and increasingly I'm finding that people skim over context, because usually that means history. Either people don't want to research it or they don't know how to. And remember, we cover a lot of material which can be deemed as popular or can be deemed as sort of mainstream. And people kind of reject the idea of looking at a history. Everything that you come across has a history. I think if you haven't got a context, your following debate will be compromised unless this is integrated, insinuated and informs your debate. You've got an important part of your essay missing. You can't write about anything unless you know the context. I believe that's where the bulk of the research effort lies. Again, this is something that people either leave to the last minute or they don't bother with. And that's why you end up with essentially a kind of floating theory that means nothing, applied to a set of impressions of something. You can't analyse anything unless you know the context. If in doubt, follow that model that I posted on the digital learning platform that you're using right now, which will be RPI, which will be reviews, personnel or practitioners, and institutions. Once you start investigating each of those factors, and do deep research on each, which is why it takes time to do this, what you will start to come back with is a sense of really how important a piece of work is, and really give you a rationale as to why you're looking at it. And that will suggest ideas, and ideas will come from that. So you need to go down further and further and further, investigate, find out, get as complete a picture as possible. Have a look at those films. You're not using the first 10 hits you find off Google Scholar. We're looking for a much deeper research pool than that. I always refer back to the Ernest Hemingway idea of the iceberg, is that your writing should be the tip of an iceberg. Below the water is a vast amount of knowledge that you haven't included. But what that tip shows is that you know what you're talking about, rather than just skimming the surface of something. You can tell by a piece of writing if it hasn't got a depth of knowledge very, very easily. Remember, start this process early. Don't start late. You'll need time to refine, edit and pull out what you need. The best essays are the ones which are rewritten, redrafted and proofed. That's why we say start early. If you leave it to the last minute, you create a mountain of work that you can't edit. So avoid an information dump. Add keywords. Find keywords from within the research that you find in the RPI model, in reviews. I start off with Wikipedia like we all do, but then I take it further. I take the keywords from that and extend that further. Secondary research. Once you've established your historical, societal, cultural, political, industrial, creative, authorial context, whatever you need to make your work kind of come alive, you need a good secondary reading. You need some secondary material. That can be a theory. It could be an overview of a history. It's really what a good academic piece is work which is collated, published, proofed, fully edited and peer-reviewed. Therefore, it has credibility. What you'll find is that most academic writing is about measuring how you use these arguments, rather than just taking a few lines and likely looking quotes, which is what I think undergrad students often do, is they'll just pull out what looks likely, is to sit back a bit, get an overview. That's one of the big skills, overview. What is the writing saying? What are the ideas in it? Not just a few kind of lines that look like, kind of interesting. What are the central ideas? Sum up the writing. Sum up what's been saying. Remember, you're thinking about time and wordage, obviously. I have to go back to readings and rereadings, and I often reinterpret them each time, depending on what I'm writing about. A poor application usually means rushed writing, or that you've skimmed the idea and not really been taking in what it's saying and what the implications are. An idea needs to be considered, needs to be outlined before it can be applied and considered. So don't just skim over this. Lead us through the debate. A good secondary reading dictates your academic and intellectual pitch. And if your secondary reading is skimmed or incomplete, then the pitch will suffer. Quote the ideas. What you're doing is you're analysing, not just describing. Analysing is about a critical overview. And critical doesn't mean negative, it means an objective overview of your particular idea and subject. Once you've got your context in place, you'll need to prove how that plays out. You'll need some evidence. It's all very well talking about maybe a text and how it appears in a certain industrial or historical context. It may be that you've got a lovely secondary reading, but where does this happen? Where does it play out? Prove it, show us. Now, primary evidence will take many different forms as you go through university. Remember, you'll be looking at everything from a printed article, a collection of printed articles. You'll be looking at television, film. It could be an image that you're using. It could be a photograph. It could be a collection of statistics. It could be a survey, a broad survey of different journalistic pieces which hasn't been fed through a secondary reading. It could be a clip, a web page, even bits of social networking, although obviously take care with that and make sure they're collated and contextualised thoroughly. Primary research really means the artefact, the object under study. It's really raw material, data that hasn't been collated before, which you can then use and you can then apply. And I suppose really that's where the creativity happens. Everything that you use, secondary or primary material, must be cited using the APA system. In film, it tends to be that the auteur system is prioritised, i.e. the director. But if you're looking at any kind of other industrial production or any kind of text, Bear in mind who is the primary contributor. And if you know the context of something, then you'll know who to cite there. So if you use a piece of primary evidence in your essay, remember to cite that, and that will then link to your bibliography. It is also should be linked to your central secondary idea, i.e. the proof shouldn't suddenly just appear and be there just as a cursory thing. It should extend from the idea, extend from the context. If you've got all three mapped out in enough detail and they all tie together, you'll have a successful piece of work. So you would probably then sum this up in a conclusion which will link explicitly to your introduction. One of the dangers I think people do is they feel they need to shoehorn in all their ideas on the end. This is what I think. Remember, what you think has been guiding all of these elements. You have been choosing the emphasis. So it will still be your statement. It should follow from an introduction, should be connected to the main body of the essay. And remember, no surprises, please. No kind of, and this is what I think. And then people jam in lots of information that hasn't been raised before. Your introduction should be setting up train tracks throughout your essay that you then pick up at the very end. So take time on this. If you're doing this in an evening or two, or if you decide to do it a day before, the results will suffer. You're submitting what is effectively a first draft. So it will take time. The process of research takes time. It's not just one click and you'll find it. You'll go up and down lots of dark alleys, you'll find lots of things you didn't expect to, and lots of things you won't use. And you may end up feeling like one or 2 days you're just collecting footnotes. But the research process is imperfect. And that's why we leave you time. That's why we start all our assessments very early. Because if you are the sort of person that leaves it all to the night before, the work will suffer and your grade will suffer. So remember, there should be an introduction. There should be a fully researched context. There should be a secondary piece of writing informing that, or several, depending on the scale of your essay, if you think that's appropriate. Check with the person who'll be marking it. There should be primary evidence. So introduction, context, secondary, primary, and then a conclusion. The conclusion should make sense and not just be a set of thoughts, or that the essay just stops. Once you've got all these areas in place, you should have a successful essay. And what we do here at the university is you're judged on the intellectual pitch and the application of what is deemed to be appropriate research. It's not just a set of your thoughts. Okay, I hope that's been instructional. There's a lot of room to move within those areas. So read the brief that's been supplied for you and have a chat if you like, or arrange an appointment with your lecturer or supervisor. But the main thing is you have awareness of the overview of what your work is doing. Okay, thanks for listening.